Hello everyone, this is Salah and you're learning JavaScript on Smart Code. So this is our tutorial number 34 on JavaScript and we are working with the object data type. In the previous tutorial, you learned how to create object type variable and how to define properties to the object and how to read out the properties, right? But as you know, an object is capable of holding properties and the functions. So in this tutorial, you will be learning to define functions to the object. At the end of this tutorial, you will be able to define complete object type variable containing properties and functions. Now, before we start defining functions to the object, let's not talk about only about the functions. In JavaScript, functions are extremely important. It's the only language that truly brought the concept of functional programming. You can solve almost every problem with the help of functions. Now, functions we are going to cover later on in depth. And you will learn several different ways to write functions in JavaScript. But at this stage, when we are trying to define functions to the object, I will give you an introduction to the function here and talk about a little so that you grasp the concept easily. So let's first learn how do we write functions, basic functions in JavaScript, and what are parameters and return values. So a function in programming is just a piece of code that solves a task. And a great advantage of using function is that it can be reused. That means a function can be called again and again whenever it is needed, right? Working with functions in JavaScript is very easy. So let's now create a very basic function. For creating the function, you will start with the keyword function and now you will give your function a name. Let's say my function name is print message. Now, right after the name, every function always takes two small parentheses. And after the parenthesis, small parenthesis, you define the function's body with the help of curly braces. That's it. And so now we have coded a function and the name of the function is print message and the task this function gonna perform we code inside the function's body. In other words, inside the curly braces. So now as the name suggests, this function is going to print some kind of message. So let's say in the cancel log, I print a message, right? So that is the message of a function going to print in the cancel. Now, if you have worked with functions in any other language, then you might know functions won't run by itself. That means if I show you the result in the console, you won't see this message. So let's check it out. And here you say our console is empty, right? So the functions in programming are meant not to be execute themselves by their own. You as a programmer decide or execute any function by calling it. And that means we now have to make a call to the function in order to execute it. And so now I'm going to make a call to the function. And for calling the function, we use the name of the function followed by the small parenthesis. So this statement is actually called calling. So this calling going to execute this function. And when the function is executed, this message is logged into the console. And so now you will see the message in the browser. And so you see right here, this text is coming from the function. And that means our function executed itself, right? And like I said, a function is reusable. And whenever you need to use the function, you will call it. Let's say I want to use it 4 times, so I will make 4 different calls. And so now the function is called 4 times. Let's check out in the browser. And here you see the result, right? So that is how we code function and call to execute it. Now in the functions, there are two important variations. Variation number one is the parameters. Sometimes you provide function data to work with and you provide data with the help of parameters. And when we code such functions, we say function with parameters. Now let's say I want to pass a string data to a function. So the data is always passed at the time of calling, and here is our calling, right? And it is placed inside the small parenthesis. Let's say I want to pass my name to the function. So my name is passed to the function at the time of calling. And so now our function needs a small modification. Our function needs to be able to receive that data and save it or store it into the variable. So in our function definition, between the small parentheses, we will code a variable, right? So the name is the variable and you don't need to put, for example, let in order to define it. Functions parameter variables in JavaScript doesn't require let or constant, right? And so now it will make more sense when the function is called here. This data string is sent to the function and this name parameter variable is initialized itself with this data. And so now you can use name parameter inside the function and process it. And so now if you check the result in the browser, it would say, hello, Salar, you are learning functions. And so you see the output, right? So the parameters are amazing and you can define several parameters based on the task you have assigned to your function. And the function reacts based on the data provided to it. For example, you can anytime send another name to the function instead of Sala. And so now our function going to print Peter, not Sala, right? So that was the variation number one, a function with parameters. Now the variation number two is the return value. Sometimes we want our function to process the data and send the processing result back to us. Now let's say we change our print message function to the addition function and it takes two parameters, number one, number two. And as the name suggests, this function is going to add two parameter values. So the code would look like let sum. Now we only want this function to add the values inside the number one and number two variable and send the result back where the function is being called. So for returning the values, we use return keywords and pass data to it. For example, the sum variable in our case. And so now we need to call this function. The name of the function is addition, and you see there are two parameters received by the function, so we need to pass data to the parameters at the time of calling, right? So this part is done. When the function is called, 10 and 20 pass as a parameter to this function. The variable number one is assigned 10 and variable number two is assigned 20. And here the simple addition and our sum variable is holding value 30 now. But here we now have something interesting and different. Our function is returning the result back to the calling position. So how do we take care of that return value? And there is only one possible way to do that. We need to assign the return to the variable, right? So this calling here has two sub functions. It is passing the data from here to here, and this calling will receive the return data sent from the function. So when the data is received, that need to be cared, and that's why we need to assign it to a variable. And now you can print out the result in the console. Let's say num sum, and so here you see the result, right. So that was a brief introduction of the functions just to understand the object data type. We will cover the functions in more detail in the future. So coming back to the topic, let's learn how to be define functions to the object. So we have an object named person that we created in our previous tutorial, and that object has three properties: name, age, and is home boolean, right? And these properties together define a person. So if I want to have a complete description about the person and publish the description somewhere, for example in the console or on the web, then I need to access all these three properties or maybe form a string that can be published on the web. For example, I can write something like this. Right, so I'm accessing all the properties and forming a formatted string that can be published somewhere. For example, I want to publish it in the console. And so here in the console, you see the description of the person. All the properties are published now. So that is one way to access all the properties and describe an object. But that is not recommended to do because we have more sophisticated technique to get the same result. We can define a function and assign it a job to collect all the properties and form a presentable string that describes the whole object, just like we did here, right? So let's now define such function to the object. So in object, a function is assigned to a property or paired with the property. So the name of the property becomes the name of the function. So let's code it. The name of the property or the function name is get person info, and as usual, right after the name of the property, we will put a colon, and after the colon, we will code a function using the function keyword. Right, so now we have a function which is paired with a property get person info, and get person info is also the name of the function, just like the name addition here. Right now, that person is gonna give us the information about the person, so I'm shifting this line of code inside the function, right? Now, previously we tried to access the properties outside of the object, and that's why we needed to refer to the object by writing the name first, then period sign, and then the name of the property. But now we are accessing the properties directly inside the person object, so we don't need to refer to the person object here, and here, right? But we need to write another keyword here, which is the part of the syntax. And that keyword is this. Now, this keyword is important, and you will use this keyword quite a lot in object-oriented programming. So this refers to the object itself. As we are inside the person object, so using this inside simply means this person object itself and the property of that object. So we are inside the method, and from here we are referring the object person and its property name, right? So now we have person info, and we would further say return that info, right? So whenever you call this function, this string is formed based on the properties, and then it is returned. So let's now call this function, and it is the same as the usual calling. So we are gonna refer to the object first, then period notation, and then we will write the name of the function followed by the parenthesis. That's it. The function is called, and now you will get the same result in the console. So let's check it out. And so you see the output in the console. And so now we have a complete object, an object with properties and the function. You remember the definition of the object, right? An object consists of properties and the functions. And here you just see the example. So before we end this tutorial, let's now talk about why do we use objects in JavaScript. Well, there are several different reasons to code objects. The reason number one, you can make a single unit out of values which are related to each other. For example, these three properties are related to each other, and that's why they belong to a single unit called person, right? So you have your code more organized. Another reason is that using objects, you can move large amount of data from one place to another. For example, you can pass a very large amount of data to the function for the processing. In our addition function right here, you see I pass two parameters to the function, right? Now let's say we need to pass more data, four different parameters. So we need to modify our function definitions like, and now at the time of calling, we need to pass four different values. So if you have large amount of data, then you can use objects instead of sending data like this. So you can simply form an object containing numbers. Let's say the object variable name is number and it has four properties. Right, so I want to add these values, so I can now send this entire object variable as parameter. And here you see our calling has now become more sophisticated. We are sending the entire object as parameter. Now in our function definition, we don't need four different variables. All we need is just a single object, and that variable is simply holding the reference to that object. Now using this object variable, we can access and refer all the properties. Right, so here you see a very practical example of moving a large amount of data from one place to another. And if you look in the console, you will see the sum value is 100, right? And there are more advanced uses of the object in JavaScript. And we will cover some of them as we learn more advanced concept in the future. I hope now you have better understanding of objects, but we are not completely done with this topic. So in our next tutorial, we will do put things together and we will develop an application using the object type data type. After that, you will learn how to add, modify, or delete object properties, and that would be our last tutorial on this topic. So I will see you in the next part, and thanks for watching.